Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. When it rains, it pours. That's the story of Volodymyr Zelensky's life. First a spat with the US president, then loss of American military support, then more attacks from Russia, and now the loss of villages that they had captured in Kursk. Basically, Zelensky is losing both on the battlefield and at the negotiating table. He's in Riyadh today to meet the Saudi Crown Prince. Tomorrow his team will meet the Americans to present their peace plan. We'll tell you what to expect. Meanwhile, Europe is worried about its own security. They're talking about sharing nuclear weapons. We'll tell you what that means. Also in focus, is the US heading into a recession? Donald Trump does not rule it out. Why foreign investors are fleeing the Indian market? Who is Mark Carney, the new Prime Minister of Canada? Why Poland is sparring with America over Starlink? Why thousands of people in Nepal are pushing for the return of monarchy? How revenge killings in Syria have left more than 1,300 people dead in 3 days, why Pakistan is complaining about India's Champions Trophy win, and why Russia is slapping tariffs on Chinese cars. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. North Korea fires multiple ballistic missiles. It coincides with the annual joint military drills by South Korea and the US. Such exercises anger Pyongyang, and they often respond with weapons tests of their own. The US-South Korea drills will continue till the 20th of March. Bangladesh denies claims that the United Nations pressured its army, but the UN Human Rights Chief says Dhaka was warned over quashing protests against former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina last year. Bangladesh was told that such a move could get it banned from peacekeeping missions. These global operations are a lucrative source of income for some countries. Prime Minister Narendra Modi to visit Mauritius tomorrow for a 2-day visit. He will be the chief guest at the National Day celebrations of the island nation. During this visit, the two countries will sign several agreements to boost bilateral ties. People of Indian origin comprise nearly 70% of Mauritius's population. Israel cuts off Gaza's electricity supply. The Palestinian Authority calls it an escalation in the genocide. The move comes as an Israeli team heads to Qatar for fresh ceasefire talks. The first phase of the deal expired at the beginning of this month. And a strike grounds thousands of flights in Germany, including all connections to and from Berlin. The strike has been called to demand better pay for the airport workers. More than 3,000 flights were affected and around 500,000 passengers impacted. It is a critical week for Ukraine and its leader Volodymyr Zelensky. A meeting is happening in Riyadh between officials from the US and Ukraine, and this meeting could decide Ukraine's fate. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Ukrainian forces are under pressure. They're facing a barrage of attacks from Russia. Moscow is making gains. Over the weekend, it pulled off a massive attack. Take a look at this. This happened in Kursk. Russia targeted the Ukrainian forces there. According to Moscow, those are Ukrainian soldiers fleeing from Kursk. Now, as you would know, Kursk is a region in Russia. It was attacked by Ukraine last year. Ukrainian forces took control of large parts of Kursk. They hope to use it as leverage, as a potential bargaining chip against Russia. The idea was to trade Kursk in exchange of Ukrainian territories in the east. Remember, Russia controls 20% of Ukrainian territory. Compared to that, Kursk is quite small. But it is Russian land, and it did give Ukraine some leverage. Now Ukraine is losing that leverage. Reports say Russia has launched an operation. It wants to take back Kursk. It has already regained control of some villages. And now the goal is to encircle Ukrainian troops. There are thousands of them there, Ukrainian troops. Russia's attack could force them to flee, or worse, to surrender. And while the Russians are on the offensive, Ukraine's forces are exhausted and depleted. The US has withdrawn military aid. So as things stand, Ukraine is weak and Russia is trying to seize the moment. It is launching attacks on multiple fronts. Overnight, there was a major drone attack. At least 13 Ukrainian regions were targeted. Kyiv says it has shot down 130 drones. And this is becoming a daily affair. Russian drones are raining on Ukrainian cities. Last week, the target was Odessa, where some civilian establishments were hit.
Was anybody hurt?
No, physically no one was injured. There are people who need psychological assistance because they were in shock.
What about children?
Thank God, all children are fine.
Seems like everybody is alive, all okay. We don't know how it will be tomorrow.
Clearly, Russia's aim is to make Ukraine's position weaker, both on the battlefield and at the negotiation table. Which brings me to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, because that is where the negotiations are taking place. A meeting is scheduled for tomorrow between diplomats from the US and Ukraine to discuss the broad contours of a peace deal. Saudi Arabia is playing mediator. Last month, they hosted a similar meeting between the US and Russia. Now it is Ukraine's turn to make its case and hopefully repair ties with the US. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is also in Riyadh. He is meeting Mohammed bin Salman today, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. But Zelensky will not attend the meeting with the US officials tomorrow. He will leave after his conversation with MBS today. In the meeting with the Americans, Zelensky's chief of staff will represent him. On the other side will be Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, or their foreign minister. And what will they discuss? Ukraine is expected to present its own version of a peace plan. Zelensky talked about it last week. He has two key demands: stop drone and missile strikes and suspend military activities in the Black Sea. In other words, he wants Putin to stop the attacks. But will the Americans listen to him? Seems unlikely. Look at what Donald Trump said over the weekend. The US president criticized Ukraine's leadership.
I think they will sign the minerals deal, but I want them to want peace. Right now,
How do they show that? How do they show they want peace?
Well, right now they haven't shown it to the extent that they should. I think right now they haven't, but I think they will be, and I think it's going to become evident over the next 2 or 3 days.
Ukraine is not ready to make peace. That is Trump's view. And this comes after Zelensky sent him an apology. In the same letter, he expressed his intention to negotiate. But convincing Trump will take more than words. Reports say the US will engage in some tough talk with the Ukrainians tomorrow. They will push for concessions, like yielding territory to Russia and holding an election. Of course, Russia is watching this closely. Ahead of the talks in Riyadh, this is what the Kremlin said.
It is not important what we expect. It is important what the United States expects. We have already heard the statements at various levels that the United States is waiting for the Ukrainians to demonstrate that they are willing to make peace. It is, in fact, probably what everyone is waiting for, if the members of the Kyiv regime really want peace or if they don't. Of course, it is very important and it needs to be determined.
This is not going to be easy for Ukraine. The Americans say that they have resumed sharing intelligence with Kyiv, but it's not going to be enough to shift the battlefield. Ukraine needs weapons to keep fighting, weapons that America has now refused to send. So for President Zelensky, the choices are bleak: a bad peace deal or losing his country altogether. Europe is not just worried about Ukraine's fate, they're worried about their own too. Until now, they could rely on NATO, the magic word that would keep Russia in check. But now that luxury is gone. President Donald Trump of the United States has made his position clear: if you don't pay up, I will not defend you. So Europe is thinking about a backup plan, a radical proposal to share European nuclear weapons. Germany's incoming chancellor has pitched it. His name is Friedrich Merz. Listen to what he said.
The sharing of nuclear weapons is an issue we need to talk about. We should talk with both France and Britain always, and in addition, from the perspective of supplementing the American nuclear shield, which we of course want to see maintained.
Some background first. There are two nuclear powers in the European continent, France and Britain. France has around 290 nuclear warheads and Britain has around 225. Of course, Britain is not part of the European Union anymore, so the bloc has just one nuclear power left, and that power is France. Nonetheless, Germany is asking both France and the UK. And France appears open to the idea. In fact, President Emmanuel Macron floated this idea last week.
Our nuclear dissuasion protects us. It is complete, sovereign, fully French. I decided to open the strategic debate on the protection through our dissuasion of our allies in the European continent. Whatever happens, the decision has always been and will remain in the hands of the French president.
We haven't heard from the UK yet, but this idea does raise a lot of questions, like what is the existing nuclear umbrella over Europe? Can Britain and France replace it? And what would be the implications? Let's talk about this umbrella first. In simple words, it is an insurance policy. If you have nukes in your country, enemies won't attack you. That is the premise of this umbrella. It is called nuclear deterrence. Now, right now, Europe's umbrella is American. The US has deployed dozens of bombs in 4 EU countries: in Italy, in Germany, in Belgium, and in the Netherlands. This is where American nukes are. In addition, Turkey also hosts American nukes, but Ankara is not part of the EU. Put together, the US has deployed 100 nuclear weapons in Europe, and most of these are airborne, meaning you can put them on bomber planes and you can drop them from the sky. That's the existing nuclear umbrella over Europe. Now we come to France and Britain. There are key differences in their arsenal. The French nukes are completely sovereign. No foreign help, no foreign technology. The French made their weapons themselves. But the British arsenal, it was made with American help. Even today, the UK uses American inputs to maintain its nukes. In fact, that help is now in doubt. A lot of diplomats worry that Trump will end this nuclear cooperation between the US and the UK, which means London will have to find alternatives. That's the first difference. The other difference is the capability. France can fire nukes from the sea and the sky, but the UK's nukes are all deployed in submarines. They can only fire from the sea. So can the UK and France extend their nuclear protection to Europe? And if they do, would it work? Well, in theory, yes, they can. France could deploy bomber jets in EU countries, say Germany or Poland, but the trigger would remain with French President Macron. That's how nuclear sharing works. Britain could also move its nuclear-armed submarines to European ports, maybe in the Nordic or the Baltics. But again, the trigger would remain with the British Prime Minister. Sounds like a good plan, doesn't it? Well, there are problems. First of all, domestic politics. That is a big problem. President Macron may like the idea of sharing his nukes with other Europeans, but the French opposition does not. They say it undermines France's nuclear deterrence. And Macron will leave office by 2027. What happens after that? Will a new president remove the nuclear shield? That lack of clarity is an issue. The second issue is capability. Let's assume that France and the UK agree to share nukes. That's around 515 nuclear bombs in total. France and the UK, 515 bombs. Guess how many Russia has? More than 5,500 nuclear warheads. There is no comparison. Finally, the third problem. Will a nuclear umbrella work in practice? A lot of experts do not think so. Would a French president risk Paris to defend Warsaw? Would a British Prime Minister risk London to defend Vilnius? They may say yes in public, but it's a very tall ask, which is why the US umbrella is so important for Europe. Because it is not just about the nukes, it is about who owns the nukes. The US is a far superior military to Russia. And that's an added layer of deterrence. I'm afraid France or Britain cannot offer that. Even Germany's incoming chancellor knows that. He may want Britain and France to share their nukes, but he says it will not replace America's umbrella. So it's not a replacement right now. It is more of an added protection. As things stand, Trump is not taking out US nukes from Europe. He may scale back military support, but he has not talked about the nuclear weapons, not yet. If it remains that way, Europe should be happy. If it changes, they're going to need options. And the only ones are Britain and France.
But are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that.
Trump are hurting the economy.
The bogeyman is back. I'm talking about recession. We spent most of 2023 worrying about it. Thankfully, most countries escaped unscathed. But those fears are back again. This time, the warning is for the US economy. Major banks have been studying the US markets and their models are blinking red. Look at JP Morgan. In November last year, they said recession risk was 17%, 17. It is now almost 31%. Goldman Sachs has a similar assessment. Their model showed 14% recession risk in January, 14%. It is now up to 23%. How is the US president reacting to this? We know Donald Trump loves to flaunt his economic credentials. He recently declared a golden age for America. But on recession, he seems iffy. Trump was asked about it last week and he refused to rule out a recession in the US.
But are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. We're bringing wealth back to America. That's a big thing. And there are always periods of, it takes a little time.
That's off-brand for Trump. You expect him to say things like, absolutely no chance of a recession. Instead, he said, it's a period of transition. His Commerce Secretary was more confident, though. He said that there would not be a recession in the US. Then why are banks warning about it? Why is the economic mood dull? Mainly because of three factors. Number one, the US markets are bleeding. The Nasdaq is more than 7% down in the last month. 7% down. Dow Jones is 3.7% down. And the S&P 500 almost 5% down. When markets fall like this, it's usually a bad sign. That's the first factor. Factor number two, American consumers seem to be wary. You see, consumers are the backbone of America's economy, or most economies, in fact. Their spending makes up 2/3 of the US GDP. In January, it fell. Consumer spending fell. US consumer spending fell 0.2% in the month of January, and this was the first fall since March 2023, also the biggest monthly decrease in almost 4 years. So consumers are not feeling confident. They're not spending money. Finally, factor number three, Trump's erratic policies. He has doubled the tariffs on China, but he has paused the tariffs on Mexico and Canada. There seems to be no consistency whatsoever. He is threatening, imposing, and delaying on repeat. And this is bad news for any economy. You need clarity and continuity for it to grow. But Donald Trump does not see it that way. He does not see tariffs as a destabilizing tool. He sees them as the path to American prosperity. Listen to this.
Are you worried about a recession? Maria Bartiromo asked you, and you kind of hesitated.
I'll tell you what, of course you hesitate. Who knows? All I know is this: we're going to take in hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs, and we're going to become so rich, you're not going to know where to spend all that money. I'm telling you, you just watch.
So what's the verdict? Is America heading towards a recession? If it is, we should all be worried. A recession in the US will affect all of us, wherever in the world we are. The US makes up around 24% of the global GDP. It is also the second biggest trader in the global market, only behind China. So if the US enters recession, it would send shockwaves across the world. Thankfully, it looks unlikely because the fundamentals remain strong. For example, job creation. The US added 150,000 jobs in the month of February, 150,000 jobs. That is not the sign of impending recession. As for consumer spending, January was a particularly bad month. You had snowstorms and wildfires in America. Such events tend to reduce spending. So most experts also agree that a recession is unlikely. Having said that, the economy could still slow down. A recession is when the GDP contracts for 2 quarters. Meaning when the growth is negative for 2 quarters. The US may avoid that disastrous scenario, but their growth could lose momentum. Look at this projection from Morgan Stanley. They expected the US to grow by 1.9% in 2025. Now that's been cut to 1.5%. Next year's forecast has also been cut from 1.3% to 1.2%. Their main reason is the tariff concern. So simply put, it is all up to Donald Trump, really. If he continues these trade wars, everyone will suffer, not just America, everyone. If the president realizes that, we can avoid a disaster. If not, nothing is off the table. Trump's tariffs are shaking up markets everywhere, including here in India. Foreign investors are pulling out billions of dollars, and the month of March was particularly rough. Foreign investors withdrew over 24,000 crore rupees. That's more than $2 billion in this month so far. 2025 has been a year of sell-offs. So far, overseas investors have pulled some $15 billion from Indian stocks this year. Earlier, this was mostly driven by domestic factors like the economic slowdown and weak performance by India Inc. Several major companies changed their projections. More than 60% of them downgraded their profit projections last month. And these are companies listed on the Nifty 50 index. This is an index of India's top 50 companies. So basically 60% of India's top 50 companies revised projections and said that they will make less money. That's a problem. Add to this Donald Trump's tariff plans. They lit a spark. They accelerated the sell-off. Remember, Trump has relentlessly attacked India on the issue of tariffs. Consider what he said last Friday.
India charges us massive tariffs, massive. You can't even sell anything into India. It's almost restrictive. It is restrictive. You know, we do very little business inside. They've agreed, by the way, they want to cut their tariffs way down now because somebody's finally exposing them for what they've done.
His tone is far from friendly, and it's hurting not just Indians. This market shake-up is also bleeding American investors in India. The US is the largest source of FPIs in India. What are FPIs? Foreign portfolio investments. These are your big-ticket investors. They often pool money from clients and make market bets on their behalf, on behalf of their clients. Earlier, American FPIs used to like the Indian market. About half of all FPI investment in India comes from the United States. But with stocks falling, these investors are also seeing heavy losses. Their portfolios have shrunk by as much as 20%, all because of the recent market decline. And that's not all. The declining rupee is making matters worse. Today, $1 was worth almost 88 Indian rupees. It was a bad day for the Indian currency. It recorded its worst single-day fall in a month. And when the rupee falls, the value of FPIs falls as well. It falls because these investors invest using their dollars, but their holdings here in India are in the rupee. So when they sell their investments, they will get fewer dollars in return. It's basically a loss of value. Look at these numbers from September 2024. US-based FPIs own shares worth almost $400 billion in Indian companies. $400 billion in September 2024. And what's the value of that investment now? Some $304 billion. So that is a decline of about 24%. What does this mean for the Indian markets? In the short term, more choppy waters, there could be more volatility in the coming weeks. Indian markets began falling towards the end of last year, 2024. So far, the rout has wiped off over $1 trillion. Experts say recovery is going to take time. US banking giant Goldman Sachs has released a projection. It says the worst may be over for the Indian markets, but the month of April is going to be critical because that is when Trump will decide on imposing reciprocal tariffs on India. He's been talking about it. The US president wants to impose tit-for-tat tariffs or reciprocal tariffs. He could target Indian exports to the United States, and he has set a deadline of April 2nd for that decision.
India charges us auto tariffs higher than 100%. And so on April 2nd, I wanted to make it April 1st, but I didn't want to be accused of April Fool's Day. That's not, just one day cost us a lot of money. But we're going to do it in April. I'm a very superstitious person. April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs kick in. And whatever they tariff us, other countries, we will tariff them.
India has tried to meet Trump halfway. New Delhi has cut taxes on several imports, but clearly President Donald Trump is not satisfied. What's worse, he fails to see that tariffs are a double-edged sword. They cut both ways. If Trump raises tariffs on Indian imports, they will hurt the US economy too. Not to mention the US investors who have stakes in India. Now to the biggest headline from Canada. They have a new Prime Minister, a man called Mark Carney. He will replace Justin Trudeau. Remember, Trudeau resigned in January. In fact, he was forced to resign after 9 years in power. His party is the Liberal Party. They started scouting for a new leader. There were many names in the ring, but in the end, they chose Mark Carney. He won nearly 86% of the ballots cast. Now, Carney is no stranger to leadership. He was once the governor for Bank of Canada. He led the Bank of England too. He was a special UN envoy. So his resume is stacked. But here's the twist. He has never held a political position.
I know that these are dark days. Dark days brought on by a country we can no longer trust. We are getting over the shock, but let us never forget the lessons. We have to look after ourselves, and we have to look out for each other. We need to pull together.
So who is Mark Carney? Why did the Liberals pick him? And is he the right leader for Canada, especially with the trade war brewing with the United States? We'll try to answer all of this. Mark Carney was born in Fort Smith. It's a small Canadian town near the Arctic. Both his parents were teachers. Carney first studied at Harvard, then he went on to Oxford, and from there he ended up at Goldman Sachs, working as an investment banker. That's his initial career. But Carney wanted to do more, so he joined the Canadian Civil Services. In 2007, he was appointed as the governor of the Bank of Canada. He helmed the bank through the global financial crisis in 2008. His decisive actions earned him a lot of praise. Soon he was poached by another bank, the Bank of England. He was the first non-Briton to lead the bank in its 300-year history. Here, Carney's skills were tested by another event, Brexit. Carney was initially against the UK leaving the European Union. He warned of adverse effects on the economy.
Because there are effects that can happen in the real economy, and there are effects that can happen in the financial system. And if we don't deliver on financial stability, then the financial system will absolutely amplify and make worse the effects in the real economy.
His stance was not very popular, but the verdict on his handling of Brexit was near unanimous. Carney is said to have done a great job navigating the Brexit storm. He minimized the effects of the breakup. So there are no doubts about his economic credentials. He's clearly very good at his job.
To be absolutely clear.
But he's untested in his new job. He has no political experience. He has never run for office. He is not a member of parliament. In fact, he will be the first Canadian Prime Minister with no political experience whatsoever. So why did the Liberals choose him? Reason number one is the contrast that he presents. For nearly a decade, the Liberals were led by Justin Trudeau. He came from a political family. He was said to be charming. He got people to listen to him. But charisma can only get you so far. Trudeau's reign took the Liberals to an all-time low. His approval ratings plunged and his party struggled. Mike Carney is the complete opposite. He's what many people call a boring guy. He definitely does not have Trudeau's so-called charm. He's a technocrat, not even a politician by trade, and most importantly, unlike Justin Trudeau, he does not make false accusations. Yes, I'm talking about the false charges against India. Mark Carney says he wants to build ties with India, and the Liberals believe that this calm demeanor can be his asset, especially in the current political climate, which is reason number two. Donald Trump is escalating a trade war with Canada, like with many other countries. In February, he announced a 25% tariff on Canadian goods. Then he delayed it for a month. Then in March, he reimposed the tariffs, and then he paused them again. But the pause was only for some goods, and Trump is not done yet. He is not backing down. He is threatening tariffs again next month. All of this has left Canadians in shock. Their disbelief has given way to anger. They're booing the US national anthem. They're boycotting American goods, removing American whiskey from shelves, even changing the name of Americano coffee to Canadiano. Well, this is the climate in which Mark Carney has to lead, and he believes that he's up for it. He once even compared Donald Trump to Voldemort, the one from Harry Potter, he who must not be named.
America is not Canada. And Canada never, ever will be part of America in any way, shape, or form. Look. We didn't ask for this fight. We didn't ask for this fight. But Canadians are always ready when someone else drops the gloves. So the Americans, they should make no mistake, in trade as in hockey, Canada will win.
Carney wants to win the trade war against the US. How? By diversifying Canada's trade ties, especially with like-minded nations like India. He wants to rebuild the trading relationship with India, and that's a good signal. But the question is, how long will he lead Canada? The country is set to go to polls in October this year. Carney will be leading the Liberals. Standing against him will be Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party. Until now, the Conservatives had tapped into anger against the Liberals, especially over rising inflation and housing prices. But Donald Trump's trade war has changed that equation. Now the sentiment is inherently anti-American, and Canada seems to trust the Liberals more. Let me show you the findings of a recent poll. 43% trust Mark Carney with the economy. Only 34% trust Pierre Poilievre. So is Mark Carney the silver bullet the Liberals needed? Well, he has the credentials. Now he also has the job. But remember, politics is not banking. Winning trust in the boardroom is one thing. Winning over voters is quite another. With a trade war brewing and an election looming, he will have no time to settle into the job. His leadership will be tested in the weeks and months ahead. Our next story is about Starlink. It's a satellite internet service controlled by Elon Musk. Starlink has been instrumental in the Ukraine war. It was a lifeline for Ukrainian troops on the front lines. It allowed them to communicate in a war zone. But yesterday, Elon Musk sent alarm bells ringing. He said that Ukrainian forces would quote-unquote collapse if he turned Starlink off. And that statement triggered a spat between Musk, Poland's foreign minister, and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. It also highlighted the fact that Musk controls the off switch, giving him direct control over the Ukraine war and the affairs of countries where Starlink operates. Here's our report.
It was a typical Sunday, well, typical for the times. A US senator from the Republican Party was having a normal day on social media, talking about exiting NATO and stopping US funding to Ukraine. Then Elon Musk commented on the senator's post, calling for sanctions on Ukrainians' oligarchs. But Musk was challenged by a Trump supporter. The person said that it looked like Musk was giving Russian President Vladimir Putin a free pass. It seems Musk took that personally. The world's richest man went to great pains to explain how this wasn't true. Musk started by saying that he had once challenged Putin to one-on-one physical combat. After that, Musk spoke about real contributions via Starlink, the satellite internet service which is provided by his company SpaceX. Starlink has been a lifeline for Ukrainian soldiers, and Musk knows it. He said Ukraine's entire front line would collapse if he turned it off. Musk was demonstrating how essential Starlink is to the war effort. But his comment sent alarm bells ringing. It reminded the world just how much control he had over the Ukraine war. His comment reached Poland's foreign minister, who decided to interject. Foreign Minister Sikorsky reminded Musk that Poland was footing part of the bill. The Polish government keeps buying Starlink terminals and lending them to Ukraine. Almost half of the cost is borne by the Polish government. Sikorsky said Poland pays about $50 million a year for Ukraine's Starlink connection. So if Musk and SpaceX prove to be unreliable, Poland would try and find other satellite internet providers. The Polish foreign minister also accused Musk of threatening the victim of aggression. Musk didn't really do that. If you look at his post again, Musk doesn't say that he will cut off Ukraine's Starlink connection. He was just lauding Starlink over his critics, to prove that he didn't support Putin. So the Polish foreign minister was wrong about that, and his American counterpart took offense. The US Secretary of State Marco Rubio jumped into the online spat. He accused Sikorsky of just making things up, and said no one has made any threats about cutting Ukraine off from Starlink. Then Rubio went a step further, telling the Polish minister to say thank you. Rubio claimed that without Starlink, Ukraine would have lost long ago, and Russia would be at Poland's border. On a side note, Russia already borders Poland through its exclave Kaliningrad. But Rubio probably wasn't being literal in his post. Nevertheless, the Polish foreign minister said thank you and that Europe and the United States could help Ukraine achieve a just peace. Meanwhile, Elon Musk also responded to the Polish foreign minister. Musk called him a small man and told him to be quiet. Musk said that Poland only paid a tiny fraction of the cost for Starlink and that there was no substitute for the service. Later, Musk put out a clarification. He said Starlink will never turn off its terminals and he would never use the service as a bargaining chip. As reassuring as that social media post is, again, Musk just reminded the world that he could switch it off if he wanted to, but he won't because of his magnanimity and benevolence. How many countries would like to bet on that? How many countries are fine with Musk having so much control? Ukraine doesn't have a choice at the moment. It's in the middle of a war. Switching to a new satellite internet service will come at a heavy cost, both in terms of money and lives. Starlink helps keep the country connected for the most part. Starlink coverage doesn't extend to the borders and Russia-occupied Crimea or the Donbas. Nevertheless, it's essential for Ukraine's forces. But what about other nations? Countries at peace who are contemplating letting Starlink enter their market. If times get tough, will they be willing to bear with Musk's insults or Rubio's demand for a thank you? Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk put out this message after the spat. It's definitely something to think about.
Nepal is said to be the land of shifting loyalties. It has spent decades oscillating between feudal rule, autocracy, and an uneasy democracy. The monarchy was once the heart of the nation, but it crumbled in the wake of a massacre. 2 decades later, tens of thousands of people in Nepal want it back. They want the king restored. And the question is why? Why is Nepal romanticizing a flawed past? Since last year, the Himalayan nation has witnessed a wave of rallies. They were spread across the country, but united in their demand: restore the monarchy. At first, they seemed like scattered gatherings, but this Sunday, things spiraled out of control. Nepal's former king landed in the capital Kathmandu. His name is Gyanendra Shah. He was on a tour of Western Nepal. On Sunday, he flew back to the capital, and there he was received by almost 10,000 supporters. The huge crowd, as you saw, chanted slogans: "We want monarchy," "Vacate the royal palace for the king," "Come back, king, save the country." This is what they said. The crowd also included members of the RPP, the Rashtriya Prajatantra Party. It was founded in the 1990s by allies of the monarch. They have long rallied to bring back the monarchy, and the crowd seemed to agree.
The country faces instability, prices are high, people are jobless, and there is a lack of education and healthcare facilities. The poor are dying of hunger. The law applies to the public, but not to politicians. Now we are awakening in every household to re-establish the monarchy, which may bring relief to the people.
A quick primer first. In 2001, King Birendra was the face of Nepal's monarchy. He wanted to make the kingdom more democratic, but his family did not support this. That year, on June 1st, tragedy struck the family. His son, Crown Prince Dipendra, crashed a family gathering. He gunned down 8 people, including his father, the king, and then he shot himself. The Crown Prince was proclaimed king in coma, but his reign lasted only a brief 3 days. Soon he died, and his uncle Gyanendra became the monarch. Until 2005, Nepal was a constitutional monarchy, but Gyanendra had other plans. He dismissed the parliament, jailed politicians and journalists, and declared an emergency, and then took power. This was met with public protest. Thousands of people hit the streets demanding the king's abdication. And in the year 2006, he had to give up power. 2 years later, the monarchy was abolished altogether. Today, the king lives like a commoner. He hardly makes any public appearances. And this same Gyanendra is at the center of the growing nostalgia.
The country should be governed by the son of a commoner in accordance with the people's will, but the king's crown will add to its beauty.
So why do the people want him back? Nepal became a democratic republic in 2008. Since then, they've had 14 governments. I'll repeat that, 14 governments in 17 years. It's like a revolving door of coalition politics. Prime ministers come and go, alliances are made and broken. Each regime is more incapable than the last, it seems, and this has left Nepal in a flux. Inflation is soaring, corruption runs rampant. The unemployment rate is 12.6%. It is even higher among the youth. In the age group of 15 to 29, unemployment in Nepal is at 20%. Last year, an average of 65,000 Nepalese youth left the country every month. 65,000 every single month. They went abroad to look for jobs, and that's a very high number for a country of 30 million. So the public is clearly disillusioned. Unfortunately, they think the monarchy is the solution to their problems. The political elite has dismissed the demand. They say there's no returning to the monarchy. Prime Minister Oli, in fact, has sent a message to King Gyanendra. He said, if you want to lead, contest an election. Now, it's easy to see why the people of Nepal are disillusioned, why they want to do away with democracy and return to the only alternative they seem to know, the monarchy. Because as things stand in their country, democracy feels like a failed experiment. But the thing is, it is not democracy that has failed. It is the politicians of Nepal. This is their failure. They are the reason why the people of Nepal are turning to the ghost of monarchy. They believe it is the antidote to their country's malaise. But that is just an illusion. Gyanendra Shah was no benevolent monarch. His brief reign was marked by repression. Reinstating him will not miraculously cure Nepal. Its democracy may be flawed, but the solution is not to undo whatever progress they've made. The solution is to demand better governance. Nepal does not need a king. It needs better elected leaders. And it must invest in a future where leadership is earned, not inherited. Now we turn to Syria. The country just saw its bloodiest days since the ouster of former President Bashar al-Assad. Clashes erupted between Syria's new rebel rulers and members of the Alawite minority group. More than 1,300 people have been killed, 1,300 people. About 1,000 were civilians. They were reportedly slain in revenge killings perpetrated by the state. Syria's new president, the former rebel leader Ahmad al-Shara, has called for peace and calm. He has promised to punish the people who kill civilians. But can he bring his own forces to heel? Here's our report.
At least 1,300 people dead. About 973 of them civilians. Horrifying tales of summary executions. And bodies left to rot in the streets. This is what has been taking place in Syria since last Thursday. Tensions came to a boil and erupted in mass violence. People in the country are calling for peace. They've seen enough war and bloodshed.
We do not want revenge. Those who violated rules and killed and spilled Syrian blood should be held fairly accountable and executed in Marj Square. But the innocent people have nothing to do with it. Families, doctors, pharmacists died on the ground, and they cannot bury their bodies. This is forbidden.
Syrian people are one. No to sectarianism. Stop the sedition. The blood of a Syrian on another Syrian is forbidden. We must build the free Syria, the new Syria, hand by hand.
Syria has been in a state of flux ever since their longtime leader, Bashar al-Assad, was ousted. He was forced to flee after armed rebels overthrew his government. This was in December. Tensions have been bubbling ever since between the new rebel rulers and Syria's Alawite minority community. This is the community that Bashar al-Assad belongs to. They are thought to have benefited from his rule, while everyone else suffered. Syria is a diverse country, made up of different religious and ethnic groups. The rebels who overthrew Bashar al-Assad are mostly from the majority Sunni Arab community. They are spread across most of the country. The Alawites are concentrated along the coast. This includes some former members of Bashar al-Assad's regime. Mountains and forests in the region have allowed the Assad loyalists to hide and regroup. Some 5,000 pro-Assad insurgents are reportedly in the area. Clashes erupted last Thursday between the Assad loyalists and Syria's new security forces. Around 148 insurgents have died in the fighting, and about 125 members of the security forces. But the violence wasn't contained to just armed combatants. The security forces were seen in helicopters, dropping bombs over the Alawite majority areas. The forces entered coastal towns en masse, and reports say they engaged in summary executions. Syria's new president is this man, Ahmed al-Shara. He's a former rebel leader who went by the pseudonym Abu Mohammed al-Julani. Al-Shara made this announcement yesterday.
We find ourselves facing a new danger represented by the attempts of the remnants of the former regime and the external parties behind them to create a new sedition and drag our country into a civil war, aiming to divide it and destroy its unity and stability. We confirm that we will hold accountable, with all firmness and without leniency, anyone who was involved in the bloodshed of civilians or harmed our people, or who exceeded the powers of the state or exploited power to achieve his own goals.
Al-Shara says that the Assad loyalists want to start a new civil war. He also claims that they're being backed by external parties. He has told them to surrender. Meanwhile, Al-Shara says that his own forces will also be held accountable. A new committee has been announced to investigate the killings of civilians. But will it really be impartial? Will it be able to punish the offending rebel security forces? The violence in Syria seems to have subsided for now, but there's still a long way to go for justice to prevail.
On to the big story from sports. India have won the 2025 Champions Trophy, and what a match it was. We lost our 15th consecutive toss in one-day matches, which in itself is a story. But Team India managed to pull through. We were chasing 252 runs on a slow-turning Dubai pitch. Some hiccups along the way, but in the end, the men in blue got over the line. What followed was major celebrations across the country. Take a look.
Brilliant performance by Team India.
After every tournament comes the obvious question, what did we learn from it? Well, two things. One, that India is the best white ball side in the world, and two, that Pakistan is not ready for tournaments like this. I'll explain why in a bit, but first the controversies. This tournament began and ended with controversy. Before it started, India refused to travel to Pakistan, and the reason was obvious. Terror attacks are surging in the country. They cannot keep their own civilians and soldiers safe, so how will they secure the Indian team? So all the stakeholders came together. The Indian and Pakistani cricket boards made their case, and finally a decision was made. India would play all their matches in Dubai. If they made the finals, even that would be played in Dubai. And that was controversy number one. Controversy number two was the so-called unfair advantage. Other teams were playing in different venues, in Lahore, in Karachi, in Rawalpindi and in Dubai, but Team India played only in Dubai. A lot of experts questioned this arrangement. They said it gave India an advantage. Same city, same hotel and same ground. The Indian team vehemently denied any such advantage, and Captain Rohit Sharma made a fair point. He said, Dubai is not India's home ground either. Just like Lahore or Karachi, it is foreign for them. So that was the second controversy. And now the final one. No Pakistani official was present at the award ceremony. You had the Indian board's chief, Roger Binney. You had the ICC chief, Jay Shah, but no one from Pakistan. A few Pakistani legends have spoken out against this. They're asking, why wasn't Pakistan represented? Unfortunately, there is no clarity on it. Pakistan's cricket board chief is Mohsin Naqvi. He is also the country's home minister. Reports say he was either ill or too busy, which is quite understandable. I mean, it's not like Pakistan was hosting their first ICC event in 3 decades, so why bother flying to Dubai? Instead, Pakistan was represented by the tournament director, Sumair Ahmed Syed. He was in Dubai for the match, but he was not on the stage for the ceremony. Some reports say he was not invited, others say that there was a communication issue. Pakistan is planning to take this up with the ICC. They want to know why their officials were not invited. We wish them good luck in this effort. But we also have a suggestion. Don't obsess over award ceremonies or invites. Obsess over how you hosted the tournament. Almost all matches had empty seats, even the ones involving Pakistan. The whole tournament had just 15 matches. Out of those, 3 were washed out. Of course, rain is not in your control, but drainage is. Modern grounds have excellent drainage facilities. Even if it rains heavily, you can still make a game out of it. Not in Pakistan, though. Consider what happened in Lahore. Afghanistan were taking on Australia in a crucial match. It began raining during Australia's innings. The downpour continued for just about 30 minutes. In most grounds, that is nothing. The staff can dry it up quickly. But in Lahore, the match had to be called off. The ground staff were using sponge and mops to clear the water. And remember, this is a global cricket event. Same with security. Visiting players had to stay cooped up inside their hotel. Their only option was to visit the golf course. Is this really how you want to host a premier cricket tournament? In fear and under lockdown? If so, Pakistan did a great job. If not, questions need to be asked. The good news is most people won't even remember Pakistan's hosting. All they will remember is India's triumph. Our last story tonight is about Russia. It is and its fading love affair with China, or rather with Chinese cars. The Russia-Ukraine war began in 2022. As a result, Moscow was put under a lot of sanctions. Western firms left the country, including Western automobile firms. But Moscow did not mind because Chinese brands took their place. Over the past 3 years, Beijing has profited from this. Chinese brands control about 2/3 of the Russian automobile market now. They dominate the industry. But now it seems Moscow has had enough. So it is clamping down on the trade using a unique form of tariffs. Here's our report.
Once upon a time, a Lada was the quintessential Russian car. You would see the car brand made by state-owned firm Avtovaz all over Russia. But that's all in the past. These days, you're far more likely to see a Chery. It's another state-backed automaker, but the state backing it is China. Chinese cars have overrun the Russian automobile market. They control 63% of it. Local Russian brands just have a 29% share on their home turf. Russia is now a dumping ground for Chinese cars, and not the electric vehicles that are all the rage elsewhere. These are old-school petrol vehicles. They make up 97% of the Chinese vehicles sent to Russia last year. Both new petrol cars and second-hand ones are crossing the border, making Russia a great place for China to dump the vehicles no one else seems to want. This has been working out great for Beijing. Chery, Geely and Haval have all been breaking records and setting new milestones, all over the last 3 years. China has expanded at the expense of Western rivals. The West pulled out of Russia, so China took its place, sometimes quite literally. The Chinese firm Chery actually took over Volkswagen and Mercedes assembly plants. Moscow might have been happy about all this initially, but now it seems to have enough. Russia is trying to curb Chinese car imports using something it calls recycling fees or a scrap tax. A fee is levied on imported cars. Officially, it's to dispose them once they stop working. The fee is paid up front. That's the official explanation for the scrap tax. But in reality, it's an easy way for Russia to crank up the prices of imported vehicles. Increase the scrap tax and the imported cars become more expensive. Because importers will just pass on the extra costs to the end consumers. Basically, it's exactly how a tariff works. Russia is currently charging $7,500 as the recycling fee or scrap tax. It's double the amount it was back in September last year. This price hike is bound to lower the demand for imported vehicles, so China won't be able to dump as many cars in Russia. Why is Moscow doing this to its close ally? Apparently, because it wants to encourage domestic production. If the Chinese company set up plants in Russia, they can avoid tariffs and create jobs for Russians to boot. That's especially important if the Ukraine war ends. Once the war is over, Russia's defense industry will slow down. So people will need other jobs. That's why it's imperative for Moscow to create employment. Will China play ball, or will it risk losing out on the lucrative Russian automobile market?
The internet is just talking about one thing today, at least here in India, and that is the Champions Trophy. Everyone is praising India's performance, but spare a thought for Pakistan. What will they do with all that unused fireworks stock? On second thoughts, let's not give them ideas, especially not their army. Besides, today is all about Team India. The internet is flooded with memes celebrating the victory. The meme fest began along with India's chase. I guess it's become a coping mechanism for a lot of fans. Take a look.
इधर जान मेरी चली गई है कितना खर्चा हुआ है मालूम है मेहता साहब
Now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. Cyclone Alfred hits Australia's east coast, leading to massive floods. An oil tanker collides with a cargo ship in the North Sea, leading to a huge blaze. And in London, a man with a Palestinian flag scales the Big Ben Tower. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1959, thousands of Tibetans protested against Chinese rule in Lhasa. The uprising was a response to increasing Chinese control over Tibet, sparking fears of an attempt to abduct the Dalai Lama. The protesters demanded independence, but the resistance was ultimately crushed, leading to the Dalai Lama's exile in India. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.